Hello, my name is Erica Johnson, and I'm the incoming Senior Vice President for Academic and Medical Affairs at the American Board of Internal Medicine. In this presentation, I'm going to share some information about a pilot model for a special consideration pathway to ABIM board eligibility for exceptionally qualified international medical graduates. This slide shows the issue that the pilot is intended to address. Currently, physicians who complete an international residency or an ACGME International Accredited Residency, and then successfully complete an ACGME Accredited Fellowship Training have no pathway to ABIM board eligibility in internal medicine because their residency training doesn't fulfill the training standard. Because internal medicine certification is a prerequisite for subspecialty board eligibility, without a pathway to internal medicine certification, these physicians cannot be board eligible in the subspecialty in which they have successfully trained. Through training records, ABIM has already identified more than 4,000 physicians who are in this situation. This slide shows the number of physicians in this situation according to discipline. We expect that there are actually more physicians than are shown here because fellowship training directors are not required to submit training information for graduates of their program for whom there is no board eligibility pathway. Board eligibility, with few exceptions, is strongly tied to the completion of accredited training in the U.S. or Canada. This accredited training structure is also built upon a competency-based medical education framework. That is, physicians must demonstrate that they have successfully achieved the 6 core competencies and any discipline-specific competencies in order to be prepared for independent practice and to deliver safe, effective patient care. With these principles in mind, ABIM proposes the following pilot idea to address the barriers to board eligibility for the physicians I described earlier. Our proposed pilot is that physicians who complete an international residency or an ACGME International Accredited Residency and then successfully complete ACGME Accredited Fellowship Training would be considered board eligible in internal medicine under ABIM policy. This is based on the successful completion of accredited fellowship training, including assessment of performance and the necessary competencies. These graduates would still need to meet all other applicable policies for admission to the internal medicine certification exam and must pass the internal medicine exam in order to become eligible to apply to their subspecialty examination in the area in which they trained. There is currently a precedent for this type of board eligibility model under ABIM's special consideration pathways for graduates of U.S. or Canadian osteopathic residencies who complete ACGME accredited fellowship training. In proposing this pilot, the ABIM is using a very specific and long-standing definition of exceptionally qualified, which comes from the ACGME program accreditation requirements. Within the ACGME framework, there is an existing pathway for internationally trained physicians to be able to matriculate into accredited U.S. fellowship programs provided they meet the criteria, which is explained on this slide. This includes evaluation of their prior training in internal medicine by the program director and fellowship selection committee, review and approval of their status as an exceptionally qualified candidate by the graduate medical education committee at the institution, ECFMG certification documentation, and after matriculation in the fellowship program, evaluation at the 12-week mark of their performance in the core competencies by the clinical competency committee. In short, the training these physicians complete is evaluated and they are individually vetted by the training program, in addition to having documentation of their ECFMG certification status. And they are assessed early on in their training regarding whether they are on track for training and completing the competency-based milestones. You may want to pause here to read more about the ACGME criteria for exceptionally qualified international medical graduates. The ABIM blog post about the pilot also contains a link to the Common Program Requirements section where the criteria are fully laid out. In developing these ideas internally with ABIM governance and through feedback from medical societies and program directors, there were questions these stakeholders had about the pilot idea. We've answered some of these questions briefly on this slide, and there's a longer FAQ document linked in the blog post. But in short, the pilot will happen in all ABIM subspecialties, regardless of length of training. International residency training will be evaluated by the training program petitioning for exceptionally qualified status for an international trained physician. The physician will be evaluated on subspecialty specific milestones and the 6 general competencies, not on internal medicine specific milestones, although there is significant overlap between the two. And lastly, pilot participants cannot take the internal medicine certification exam before successfully completing their fellowship training because their board eligibility would be based on the demonstration of competency that comes from documentation of successful completion of fellowship training. Back in the spring, we shared the pilot idea with medical societies and program directors to get their feedback. Generally, there's demonstrable support for the idea from both of these groups based on the responses we received. Notably, there was a difference in support levels between internal medicine and subspecialty program directors, with higher support from subspecialty program directors. We also asked responders to tell us why they supported or had concerns about the pilot idea, and you can see a summary of those themes on this slide. You may want to pause here to take a moment to read some of the reasons for concern and support that were shared with us. In addition to the pilot idea, our model includes the goals and outcomes we will be monitoring in order to determine whether the pilot is achieving what we expect. Our goals are essentially the reasons why we want to have the pilot in the first place. In creating this opportunity for internationally trained physicians, we hope to remove barriers for physicians who demonstrate meeting the same standards as their accredited program peers. We hope to build and test a model for board certification eligibility that uses a primarily competency-based medical education framework. And we hope to provide the pilot participants who meet standards for board eligibility access to the same tools and processes that other ABIM diplomats have access to in initial certification and maintenance of certification. In order to be able to assess the outcomes of the pilot, ABIM will have a considerable amount of information it is already tracking, shown here on this slide, that can be applied to answer questions such as, do these physicians pursue board certification at all? Do they get certified in internal medicine in their subspecialty or just in internal medicine? Or how do they perform on ABIM assessments? What are the passing rates compared to U.S. medical graduates? We can also ask what their practice setting is post-training, or whether they remain in the U.S. post-certification. And does the pilot affect in any way the number of U.S. medical graduates matching into accredited fellowship programs? But there are other types of information that pilot participants will need to provide to us in order to study the efficacy of the program and its outcomes. All told, we expect to be able to know how the pilot is performing in a data-driven way, and that will allow us down the line to make an evidence-based decision about whether it is achieving the goals we set out earlier, and whether or not it should continue and perhaps be made another official special consideration pathway for board eligibility. So once again, here is the idea that we're asking for your feedback on. Our proposed pilot is that physicians who complete an international residency or an ACGME internationally accredited residency and then successfully complete an accredited fellowship training would be considered board eligible in internal medicine under ABIM policy. This is based on the successful completion of accredited fellowship training. They would still need to meet all of the other applicable policies for admission to the internal medicine certification exam and must pass the internal medicine examination in order to become eligible to apply to their subspecialty examination in the area in which they trained. And just as a reminder, there is a precedent for this type of board eligibility model under the ABIM's special consideration pathway for graduates of U.S. or Canadian osteopathic residencies who complete ACGME accredited fellowship training. Thank you for watching this explanatory video. If you're ready to provide your feedback, you can go back to the blog and find a link to complete a public comment form there. There's also a more detailed written explanation and FAQs on the blog if you prefer. Thank you again.